Now come the days of the king.
Sean, it's wonderful to have you on the program. I appreciate your patience today. And I appreciate your willingness to dive into the art of documentary filmmaking. Seems to be quite the family business. And I love your subject matter here with RFK.
Yeah. It's nice to see the story is both a Democrat and independent, right? Because the story is about RFK Sr. and Jr. And as we know, RFK Sr. was one of the great potential presidents, right, that we never had. And
yes,
RFK Jr. is maybe one day he'll be president. Some people, I think are still hopeful that we'll see that. And so I started launching into this project when RFK Jr. decided to run for president. And I said, well, what a great parallel, because between him and his father, and at the same time, the mainstream media was trying to paint him as sort of the black sheep of the family, right? That he was a kook, that, they would quote, JFK's grandson and others, basically attacking him, calling him, crazy and things like this. And I said, well, actually, if you look at RFK Jr.'s pedigree, his background, his work, on the environment, he was loved. He was beloved by the establishment. He was beloved by the Democrat Party. He spoke at the DNC in 2004 before Obama. And so I felt like, let's remind people who RFK Jr. is, and also who RFK Sr. is, and who JFK is, because actually they all challenged the establishment in different ways throughout their lives. And I believe that's ultimately what led to the assassination of both JFK and RFK Sr.
Can I ask you a couple of questions, since you've gone so deep and probably spent hundreds of thousands of hours researching for this documentary? What would the country be like? Would we have the modern day Democratic Party today if the Kennedys had actually been the foundational family of that party? Because that's what was about to happen, right? You were about to see a Kennedy dynasty that might have spanned multiple presidential cycles. JFK obviously was set to romp in the 64 cycle and was probably going to win something like 40 states. What would the country have looked like exactly with the Kennedys at the helm of the Democrat Party?
Sure. Certainly the Democrats of today, there's a lot of Democrats, as we see with RFK Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard and many others, right, who have left the Democrat Party as it is today, because it's gone. Even I think people use these quotes, from Bill Clinton in the 90s, right, talking about needing to enforce strict, to be strict when it comes to illegal immigration, right, things like this. That the Democrats of the 90s even are not the same as the Democrats today. That's clear. The main thing with JFK and RFK was, when it came to domestic policy, they were pro-labor at the same, they did challenge businesses and the big businesses of the time, big oil and things like this. But at the same time, they were challenging the system when it came to foreign policy. That was, I think, the main reason that they were killed. The Vietnam War, my father argued this back in his film JFK in 91, the Vietnam War,
by the way.
And it got into things that, to this day, the establishment doesn't want to acknowledge. They want to still blame JFK. The establishment historians still want to make Vietnam JFK's war that Johnson inherited, as opposed to the idea that it was a CIA war, really. It was a CIA operation that was expanding. And JFK, was kind of reluctantly giving aid. And ultimately, just as with the Cuban Missile Crisis, which we highlight in our documentary on RFK, like, they didn't want, JFK and RFK did not want to be warmongers. They did everything they could to find peace. And that was very clear with the Cuban Missile Crisis, when there was a lot of hardliners who were saying, well, the Soviets are putting missiles into Cuba. We need to bomb Cuba right away, bomb it. Kennedy's like, let's embargo first. And, RFK is basically working a back channel, trying to get directly to Khrushchev in the Soviet Union to say, listen, let's work out a deal, right? Let's make a deal essentially where you're going to pull your missiles back from Cuba. We're going to pull our missiles back from Turkey. And that way we don't feel like we're at each other's throats here. Let's actually get to a place which we're working towards, to maybe have joint space exploration. Let's not escalate things, right? Let's work and ultimately that mentality, I think, which JFK and RFK exemplified, was that of rationality, right? It's like, let's seek our best interest, but also recognize the interest of the other, because you can't have a negotiation where you just say, hey, I'm the boss, I'm in charge, America's stronger than you, we're gonna do it my way. It never work. It doesn't work, right? We've seen it throughout the last, let's say less than 100 years, but like 80 plus years post, World War II of international affairs. And what happens with all these coups, right? We go and we coup governments. We know now, the CIA operations, and we've seen it all the way through, the Libya coup and the Syria coup. And it's just like, it destabilizes. It creates more enemies, right? It creates more instability. And this is not what we need. We don't need this reputation of just being the bully. So I think what JFK and RFK represented was people that were thoughtful, that were thinking about, okay, how can we pursue our interest, but also recognize the interest of the other so that we can come to a negotiation. And as a result, I don't think we would have gotten to the Vietnam War if JFK had survived, right? I mean, it's pretty clear he was already he already was drawing down some advisors, but he was talking about getting them all out after the 1964 election. Mm-hmm. And kind of like with Laos, which was another issue of communism, socialism, communism, he wasn't willing to engage in Laos. He wasn't going to engage in Vietnam. He wanted it to be, he said very clearly, I think it was to Cronkite, it's like, in the final analysis, it's their war, meaning South Vietnam versus North Vietnam. They're the ones that have to win it or lose it. We can support the South Vietnamese, but we're not going to make, ultimately bring our own boys, as we saw with the Vietnam War, which devastated our country psychologically, morally. So much of, if you think about, so much of modern day left was born from the horror of Vietnam, because as people were radicalized essentially by saying, wow, look at how ugly we are as a country. We're out here sending hundreds of thousands of Americans out there to fight, to fight these, what they call whatever gooks or whatever, but the slang of the time. But it's like, that why are we sending them thousands and thousands of miles across the world for American interests? And is this imperialism, right? And so it really stoked a lot of the anger and violence as we saw on campuses. And ultimately, there was radical movements. There was things like Weathermen. A lot of things grew out of it. And I think a lot of the political left of now, well, as we know, right, was rooted in that era of, look at how bad we are as a country, that you can on TV, see what we're doing in My Lai, massacring, civilians, and we're bombing and blowing up people. And ultimately they say, over 1 million Vietnamese were killed, and I guarantee a lot of them were civilians, right? And we and then we talk about an RFK documentary, Legacy, the use of Agent Orange chemicals, right? Mm-hmm. Monsanto makes these chemicals to deforest Vietnam. Well, it creates genetic mutations, not just for the Vietnamese, but also even for our own soldiers, and cancers and things like this, right? And so that's really, I think, the heart of what we get into in this documentary, is this impulse that JFK and RFK had against war, to say that should always be our last resort, not our first response.
Your answer there, Sean, is remarkable, because what you've just described is in such stark relief to what we've witnessed over the last 48 hours with President Trump winding down the war in Gaza. And you had a fanatical left that was marching through the streets, screaming free Palestine and the war, right? But Trump went and did that. I don't know where they went. I'm not sure where those people went. They're all gone now. But Trump did it, actually. And pretty much everybody who's reasonable is celebrating that there's no more spiraling war there that could turn into a much larger regional conflict. And we all know how that goes, right? And so do you believe that President Trump is the inheritor of the JFK legacy?
In a way, he, we did a documentary with Tucker Carlson, actually, it's on his network, and it's called All the President's Men, right? It's a documentary focusing on Papadopoulos, General Flynn, Giuliani, Kash Patel, Tucker, and we, through these stories, Carter Page, through these stories, we show the Russiagate hoax. And our argument in that series, All the President's Men, was the reason that they created this conspiracy. Our intelligence services created the conspiracy that Trump was allied with Russia, right? It was really a conspiracy within our intelligence services to paint Trump and his allies as Russian agents. And our thesis is that it's because Trump came in basically saying, hey, why don't we have better relations with Russia? When he started saying that during his first campaign back in, starting in 2015, 16, he was a marked man, because you can't say, let's have a good relationship with Russia, right? He was saying, let's get along. This is a major power in the world, which they are. And from that moment on, they had to target his administration and basically, denigrate him, paint it, try to impeach him, which they did multiple times. I mean, it really starts from our perspective on his overall approach, which was let's make a deal, let's work, let's figure out how we can work with the Russians.
Yes.
And so
when you're describing JFK, it sounds like that. It sounded like Trump, like, hey, every party has to get something out of this. We're going to make a deal here. We're going to bring peace. You're like describing JFK. I'm like, yo, that sounds a lot like Trump, man.
Well, that's why we made that thesis in that docuseries about Trump. And ultimately, I think that's why he was hated so much. I mean, even Tucker Carlson talks about like Bill Kristol, who he worked with for years, really hating Trump from like the moment he came out and was saying Iraq was a disaster, right? He's like, Iraq war is a disaster. It's cost, lives. It's cost, trillions of dollars. What are we getting out of it as a nation, right? Like we're sacrificing our energy, our youth, our prestige in the world has been sacrificed. Our accountability. You're making up lies about WMDs, and you look bad, right, as a nation. So that's when the moment that all these neocons came against Trump, and both Republican and Democrat, right, the McCains and the Democrat neocons, so it's like, or just Democrats in general. But the point is that it was from that moment of him basically being pro, let's make deals. And I think that's what I admire the most about his ability to, I think, navigate the Middle East, because ultimately that's the only way we're going to have a peace in that region, is let's make deals between the various Arabs, and Israel. It's like, that's the only way forward. And likewise, I really am hoping that he does something with this Ukraine war, because it's in our ability. We're the ones that are really stoking that conflict. I mean, people think this is Russia versus Ukraine. No, this is Russia versus NATO. And, NATO has basically, I always say, like, look, it's like the Cuban Missile Crisis. When the Cubans put missiles 90 miles away, we almost went to war. Russia was doing that now, or China was doing that now, putting missiles in Mexico or Canada. I'm sure we would have a much feistier response than just saying, oh, that's so disappointing. No, that's where Russia is now vis-a-vis Ukraine. They have a country that's historically very connected, culturally connected to them. That's literally, Kiev is something like, a few, 100 miles or so from Moscow. And you don't want to have active weapons on your border. So the same deal that Trump has worked out, and I hope it lasts. Obviously, we all pray that it lasts, because this is just the beginning in the Middle East. We all hope that he can do the same. But there's such a war machine that's profiting, as we know, from this Ukraine war. And it's been profiting, for these last, 10 years, really, when the conflict started back in 2014 with the coup in Maidan. It's been just, it's been about mostly our military industrial complex selling weaponry to Ukraine. And every time when we turn around, we see, $100 billion deals here and there, right? So of course, it's a war machine. It's a war machine, and you have to navigate it without getting killed, which I believe is what happened with JFK and RFK Sr.
Okay, so that's very interesting. It brought me directly to my next question. Of course, we watched them try and kill Trump a couple times, sometimes with Ukrainian weapons. Fascinating enough, if you read the DOJ filings from Ryan Ralph. But in your documentary, there's so much work that has been done on JFK's assassination, and I don't think anybody in their right mind believes any more in the official narrative. I think that, in fact, polling shows the vast majority of people believe that obviously there's something else going on there. What it was, well, I'm not, I'm not, maybe we will never know, but nobody believes the official narrative. And I think that's a victory, quite frankly. RFK, however, was also assassinated. And in your documentary, I want to ask, because I haven't actually watched it, Sean, and I look forward to watching it on Angel Studios. Link again in the description for the new RFK documentary. What did you find? What is your thesis as to what happened with RFK? Was it Sirhan Sirhan? And was it just like was it some psychopath? Was he on MKUltra? Was this dude like on mind control? You know, I've heard every story. I've heard a lot of stories from RFK Jr., you know, about what a mysterious, strange dude this guy was that goes and shoots and kills RFK. What did you find in your documentary?
Yeah. No, I mean, we get into it, you know, as part of the climax of the story. I've always been, you know, raised obviously with being exposed to a lot of the information, let's say, around the JFK assassination. But even as a kid, you know, looking at the books and the research, and obviously it's exploded, by the way, the industry around the JFK assassination in terms of the research and the writing has exploded since the film JFK came out. Before it, there was, you know, there were some books. Now, I think if you look online, I mean, on Amazon, you'll find probably thousands of books about the JFK assassination, right? Not as much about the RFK conspiracy, not as many documentaries about it. And so, I mean, I watched, I think The Second Gun was a film that my dad showed me when I was a kid. And yeah, I was always curious about the RFK thing. It's a little bit, how do you say, it's the JFK this thing is so evidently not just a single shooter, because you've got the video, right? There's a Zapruder film showing the time frame that it's operating in. The idea of 3.6 seconds or something, or 4 seconds or something to pull off the 3 shots, right? That hit Kennedy, and then the magic bullet, and all the things that my dad got into with JFK, and then his subsequent documentaries on JFK. I think it makes it pretty clear, like, this wasn't a one guy shooting from a window, right? With RFK, it was, oh, well, we actually, Sirhan is not dead. You know, everyone saw him with the gun. This is why even RFK Jr. was like, I assumed he was the killer, right? Because, you know, look, you've got the confession, and you've got the witnesses, and so it should be case closed, right? But then you look at the autopsy, because you always have to look at the forensics, right? If the forensics and the evidence doesn't add up, then you can't, you know, as we know now much more from the true crime era, there's a lot of false confessions. A lot of people are bullied into confessing in this country. It's the nature of psychological torture, right? If, you know, there's a lot of arguments that if you're, you know, if you have a, you know, let's say if you have a guilty conscience, if you're not great moral standing, clarity, if you're with the police for a certain period of time, you could be bullied into making false confessions. We know this to be true now. With Sirhan, he was certainly under mind control. Whether it was MKUltra, I mean, that's, I think, the most likely argument, because MKUltra, we know existed. We know it was so powerful a program of mind control that when Helms, the CIA director, was forced out by Nixon, he basically we know at least that the one thing that he shredded, he maybe shredded other things, but we know he shredded the MKUltra documents. And we wouldn't even know about MKUltra if not for a few boxes that were found that had not been shredded. So basically what we know about MKUltra is mostly based on a few documents and then a lot of people coming forward and giving testimony about, you know, and there's some wild stuff. Even in the 90s, like during the Clinton years, there were people coming forward basically who had been abused, and they were very young. Some of them were children. But yeah, they talked about, you know, being mind controlled to try to create, perfect assassins and sex slaves. And I mean, you name it. There's so much on this subject, so much literature on this subject. It's a fascinating subject. Yeah,
please continue, please.
So with Sirhan, I mean, again, it's clear that, you know, that he doesn't have memory of it. And it's not like he's just, you know, he changed his story. He never had memory. Even at the time he was arrested, he wasn't clear of what happened, where he was. And to this day, he doesn't have memory. So this is not just an act. It's not like he played an act and, okay, you figured it out. Like with some of these serial killers, you know, they acted and, oh, I was, you know, had multiple personality. I think of the Hillside Stranglers played that, you know, I had multiple personality story, and ultimately it fell apart, right? And it was discovered that they were faking it. Sirhan, it's been clear he doesn't remember. So when RFK Jr. figured out that there was something wrong is when one of the people that was shot, that was close to his father, said, look, you got to look at the autopsy, because the autopsy tells a different story. And sure enough, RFK Jr. looked at it and he said, wait, you're telling me the coroner is saying that the bullet entered from about an inch behind the ear and that the 4 bullets that hit RFK Sr. all came from behind? But Sirhan was about 3 to 6 feet in front of him. Right? So it doesn't make sense.
How is that not public? Like, how is that not one of the biggest scandals in the world, actually?
Well, you know, they've been trying to parole Sirhan. He's had good lawyers that have been trying to, you know, parole him for a long time. He can't even get parole because Kamala Harris blocked him. Gavin Newsom blocked it. I mean, there's an established way, as we know. Look, we are sometimes I say we're in a banana republic. I think anyone that interfaces with the court system, with the government at high levels, with the nature of, you know, that interface between the big corporate power and the government, it's like there's a different set of rules and understanding at that level than there is for, you know, for what the public is sold, because the media plays this gatekeeper role. And this is what I've seen since I was 7 years old, you know, or was it 7 years old during the making of JFK. When my dad tried to make that film, the media already tried to attack the film before it came out.
Of course.
They already were saying this was a fantasy before it came out. Oh, we got draft of the script. You know, here are the things that are wrong with the movie before it comes out. And then when it came out, it was like they were all in on, no, this is a fantasy. This is wrong because every, you know, whatever, this fact is off, or that point is, you know, he took 2 witnesses and conflated it into one person, or, you know, it's like you're trying to tell a story in a period of time, and you're trying to condense things. So it's not a perfect legal argument. The film isn't, but the evidence overall, my dad wrote multiple books going through the script, making, you know, getting historians to, like, you know, that were on his side to go through the evidence and say, well, yeah, but let's have a debate on these subjects. The mainstream media does not want us to think that there are conspiracies in this world, unless it's government saying, well, 9/11 is a conspiracy, or we're going to charge you as a drug trafficker or a terrorist under conspiracy charges. The government uses conspiracy all the time. But if we as citizens try to say, hey, there's a conspiracy here, yeah, you're crazy. That's how this thing works.
I'm just confounded by this, and I cannot wait to go and watch this documentary. I'm going to watch it this evening. We're going to Charlie Kirk's Memorial Medal of Freedom ceremony, and I'll have a little bit of time, and I cannot wait to watch it. I guess I want to leave it on one note. You know, everyone has seen the Zapruder film. Virtually anybody who's tried to pay attention to this has seen the Zapruder film. And it's demonstrable evidence, obviously, that there was a larger conspiracy to kill JFK. That's like real physical evidence there. Those who have studied it a little bit more can look at JFK's autopsy and see the peculiarities and extreme darkness and cover-ups surrounding the autopsy of JFK. Also clearly lies. What you're telling me is that what happened to RFK is even more demonstrable than that? Because, you know, at least you could bend some of the JFK evidence, you know, you could try and slam it into like a single shooter narrative, and many have. But you will never be able to do that with Sirhan 7 feet in front of RFK, and RFK getting shot a bunch of times in the back. That is just like that is like clearly laughable, bends all laws of physics. Can't happen. Like, can't happen in a more demonstrable way than JFK getting shot by Oswald can't happen. Am I correct in that, Sean?
I would say the forensics would tell you it's impossible. The number of shots, also, there was evidence that there were more bullet holes that were found in the wall, like lodged in like the door frame and things like this. And the LAPD covered that up, basically. They had to hide that evidence because they wanted a clear case. They wanted a simple case. Now, there's also a question of, was Robert Mayhew, was he a major orchestrator of it? Because Mayhew, as we know, he's one of these great, you know, James Bond type of characters that people used to know about. He even wrote an autobiography about his exploits. I'm sure it was a whitewashed autobiography, but he was one of these guys that was FBI, CIA, worked for Howard Hughes, who was, as we know, Howard Hughes was like the Elon Musk of that era, right? I mean, he had huge government contracts. He was doing all this work with everything from, from from World War II forward, when it came to like our jets, our manufacturing of planes and things like this. And also, he was interested in space. So you've got Mayhew, who's a very connected guy, connected to he was an intermediary between CIA and the mafia when it came to a lot of these Castro operations. And he's also has kind of the LAPD, let's say, arguably in his pocket. But in general, it's like with any of these things, like when you say the LAPD, well, no, most cops are not corrupt, but there are, as with anything, it's like CIA. It's not to say like if you're just an analyst for the CIA or you're doing your job, you're not all bad people. When we say CIA, it's like we're talking about an organization that has shadowy elements, right? And an ability, because of the compartmentalization of it, to keep secrets and to do things that would be classified as illegal if you or I did it. We just know it, right? And it's the same with, it can be the same with the police. It can be the same with anyone that has a certain amount of power. So did the LAPD, certain people within it, or let's say from the top down, did they cover it up? Sure. And I think that's how, when you get into these, again, these institutions, it's like, there are people that probably want to talk and just were told, you're not going to talk about it, right? Because there's bigger issues at stake here. You can't bring RFK Sr. back. And I think the same with JFK. Why didn't more people talk over the years? Well, they probably talked to their buddies or maybe want someone here or there, or maybe they took it to their grave. But that's what, when you're dealing with an ability to assassinate someone publicly, like a JFK or an RFK, sends a message to everyone else. I think the same with Charlie Kirk. I think the same with the near assassination of Trump. The assassinate to publicly execute people basically sends a message: be careful what you say. If we can kill them, guess what we can do to you?
I mean, absolutely, like absolutely. And it's why I'm so interested in the continuation of the JFK legacy with Donald Trump, is because it is an affront to Trump's existence, and then Trump's success is actually an affront to that evil. And I think it's profound. And I'm sure that you actually study that in this documentary. Everyone can go and source the documentary right here, the Angel Studio Guild. It is streaming here for Guild members. You can see it at the URL angel.com /watch RFK Legacy is right here. This is the URL that you would go to, and you can become an Angel Guild member, and you can support independent creators. You can support truth telling here, like what Sean has done here in the incredible legacy of his father. And you can also catch so many other bangers that Angel Studios is producing. Sean's X handle is Watching Sean right here. You can follow him. He's got 21,000 subscribers, and you should be one of them. Always subscribe to the people who are really creating in the world. We need creators. Remember, that is such an important act of our Lord and Savior. Creation. You must be able to create and do new things. So we thank you, Sean, for doing things like this. Very brave things, actually. We hope we get the answers to these questions.
We do indeed. At the same time, just asking the questions is important, because we, as critical thinkers, that's our freedom. That's the beauty of this country, right? When they try to censor us and silence us and say, you can't ask those questions. You can't, you can't infer there's another story than what we present to you. We control the narrative. No, that's not America. We're still a free country.
That's such a great point. Thank you for bringing that up. That's exactly right. Like, and that's why you've succeeded, and your family's legacy, obviously, in trying to speak the truth. You've succeeded in the fact that I'm not sure people know exactly who killed JFK, but everybody knows they've been lied to, right? And that is remarkable. That is a remarkable change in our culture, and it's in part to the Stone family. And so, thank you very much. Godspeed, Sean.
Thank you, Ben. Thanks for having me.